Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name's Xile, here to do another one of these geopolitical analysis videos. Oh boy! First of all, a couple administrative things I gotta get out of the way. I recently hit 100 subscribers, so thank you all so much for the support. In honor of this, if I reach 250 subscribers, I will dust off Why Trump Won Part 4 and begin working on it again in earnest. I've been focusing more on these unscripted sort of analysis videos recently, but I'll go back to my scripted content. And in the spirit of that, I am working on a new scripted content video right now about the factionalization of the MAGA movement of the right wing in the United States. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so I made a video about a month ago about how the Trump administration was going to invade Venezuela, and earlier this month it happened. And there's been a lot of interesting things that went down, and there was a lot of consequences, and there's been a lot of new targets that the United States could potentially focus on. So I wanted to make kind of a follow-up video, kind of describe my thoughts on what went down. So let's go over exactly what I'll be discussing in this video. First, we will talk about what I got right about the Venezuelan invasion. Then we'll talk about what I got wrong. Then we'll look at some of the immediate consequences and the fallout from such a military action. Then I'll basically go down the list of countries I think the United States could target next. And these are in order from most likely to least likely, starting with Cuba, then Greenland, which there has been a big fuss about recently, Mexico and Canada, some islands in the Caribbean, and finally Brazil. And then we'll wrap up the video by discussing sort of the long-term ramifications of this geopolitical realignment and what I think that means for the future. So first, what I got right. So let me recap exactly what went down. So on the morning of January 5th, the United States Air Force struck several targets, including, by the way, the tomb of Hugo Chavez as kind of like a extra fuck you. And they disabled all of the meager air defenses that exist in Caracas, and the Delta Force landed in one of Maduro's compounds up in the mountains above Caracas and captured him and safely extracted him. While a boots-on-the-ground invasion did happen, like I said it would, it was in a far more limited capacity than I anticipated, right? I anticipated, Marines storming the beaches in sort of a D-Day style invasion. Obviously, that did not happen. There's a big difference between an actual military invasion and what we saw here, which was a targeted surgical special forces strike. The funniest part about all of this is that I mentioned in my first video about how the given reason, drugs, was total nonsense, and ever since this capture of Maduro happened, the Trump administration has basically shut up about drugs. They basically stopped talking about it, and now they're parroting all the justifications that I used in my video, which were the oil, the Monroe Doctrine, and the personal beef between Trump and Maduro. So I feel extra vindicated on that front. Now for what I got wrong. So first of all, I think it's very doubtful that the United States actually does that ground invasion. I don't think we're going to re-invade Venezuela. I think it's very unlikely that's going to happen. I also predicted that this woman here, Maria Machado, would be installed as sort of our puppet ruler of Venezuela, and that has not happened, despite Maria repeatedly humiliating herself. She gave the physical Nobel Peace Prize itself to Trump, and despite all of that, he correctly stated that Maria neither has the respect of the people nor the leaders in charge of Venezuela to actually lead the country, and I actually agree with him on that front. Additionally, even though Maduro, the head of the snake, has been cut off, the regime is still very much intact. His vice president has taken charge. All of the old generals are still in charge. Fundamentally, on the ground, nothing has really changed. Another fun quirk is that despite talking nonstop about the oil both before and after Maduro's extraction, nobody actually wants to invest in the infrastructure needed to extract that oil. So Trump had a big meeting with a bunch of American oil executives, and he was basically like, hey, we got a country up for grab. Who wants some oil, baby? And everybody turned him down because it would cost an estimated $10 billion just to get Venezuela producing in a capacity that would be profitable for these companies within the next, say, 5 years. And that's, of course, assuming that the regime is stable enough and that the Venezuelan government doesn't immediately nationalize whatever investments American companies make into the country, which is definitely not guaranteed. So the headline is none of the oil companies actually want to extract any oil from Venezuela. So that whole justification is total BS, except for one quirk, which is that the oil tankers themselves that the American military seized were sold personally by Trump, and that money was personally deposited in his Qatari bank account. So he personally made about 80% of the revenue from those oil sales. Classic Trump, classic corruption. What else is new? Okay, the operation was extremely successful by any metric. There were exactly 0 American fatalities, while there were about 30 Cuban/Venezuelan fatalities. But it was almost too successful. So if we put all this information together, it kind of leads me to one conclusion, and that is the Trump administration directly colluded with the new ruler of Venezuela, the former vice president, in order to extract Maduro. Basically, the deal went something like this. We'll give up Maduro, we'll give up his location, we'll tell the Venezuelan army to stand down. In exchange, you get to extract Maduro, but you don't actually topple the regime, you don't actually overthrow the existing power structure, and you let Venezuela keep its sovereignty. I think something like that was the deal, and by all accounts, it went off without a hitch. All right, now let's talk about the short to medium term consequences of this military action. First of all, I think we can definitively say that the liberal world order is dead, deader than disco. Let me take a moment, though, to explain exactly what that means, what the liberal world order is. So, after the Second World War, a bunch of countries realized that fighting each other was kind of stupid and wasteful and really bad. And so they wanted to create a framework where basically peace, diplomacy, and trade would be the order of the day, and military conflict would only be a last resort. And this led to the creation of international organizations such as the UN and ultimately the EU. And the whole thing was guaranteed by the American Navy to keep the shipping lanes open, and the American Army to basically punish any strongman dictator who got out of line. See Saddam Hussein in the first Persian Gulf War. But this sort of international framework, this sort of system, has been on the rocks for a while. I think the first big blow was America's invasion of Iraq in 2003. That was built on extremely shaky ground. The whole weapons of mass destruction thing, which turned out to be a big bag of bullshit. Another big blow to this came when Ukraine was invaded by Russia in 2022. And America basically did nothing. I mean, we sent them money and we sent them guns, but we didn't actually take any real military action. So that kind of got everybody thinking, well, if the U.S. isn't actually going to intervene if we break the rules, then what are the rules there for? And then this, now we've taken, the final step, which is we've just straight up invaded a sovereign country and replaced their leader. And this basically gives any country the excuse to do the exact same thing. So, for example, this whole thing, right, was billed as a law enforcement action, right? Maduro is a narco-terrorist. We're just arresting him as part of a law enforcement action. But China could say the same thing about Taiwan, right? They could say Taiwan is a rebelling province. The leader of Taiwan is a rebel, is a traitor, and so we aren't invading Taiwan. We are taking a law enforcement action to apprehend the traitorous government of Taiwan. You see what I did there? So any excuse, I guess, that we have for Taiwan remaining independent of Chinese control is basically out the window, because now they can just repeat Trump's words back at him as their justification. Additionally, this has soured our diplomatic relations with many countries. There were a couple that were like okay with what we did. but Brazil, China, India, Russia, a bunch of countries in the EU, Canada, all of those countries took pretty strong stances against our invasion. Some of them matter more than others. Obviously, China and Russia we're going to condemn no matter what we did, but our allies condemning our actions should definitely be raising some red flags. So now I'm going to go through the countries I think we are going to take military actions against next. By the way, I am including the percent chance I think that this will happen during Trump's second term in office, okay? So that's the next 3 years. The first up is Cuba. So first of all, I talked in my last video a lot about how overthrowing the remnants of Fidel Castro's regime is Secretary of State Marco Rubio's lifelong ambition. You could even make the argument that this whole operation in Venezuela, at least from Marco Rubio's perspective, was designed to isolate Cuba both diplomatically and economically. Now that someone theoretically more compliant is in power in Venezuela, we can pressure them to cut off oil exports to Cuba, and the Trump administration has already been moving forward in that direction. If this actually happens, it would cause an energy crisis on the island, which would likely lead to the fall of their government. I also think that if we did something against Cuba, it would cause the lowest amount of blowback, of diplomatic fallout, because the reality is Cuba doesn't have many friends on the international stage. Kind of Russia, a little bit, but the only other one is Venezuela. And again, we've already kind of taken care of that. Nobody else really would protest. I'm not exactly sure what form this military action is going to take, whether we do what we did in Venezuela and we just, capture or kidnap the leader, or if we do a Bay of Pigs style targeted invasion in Havana, or if we fully blockade the island with our navy. I don't exactly know what will happen, but I think more likely than not, some sort of military action will take place against Cuba within the next 3 years. Next up, you know it, you love it, it's Greenland. This little, well, I guess it's not little, it's pretty big. This territory has been the talk of the town for the past couple of weeks, and there's been, I had this percentage at 50% up until the end of last week. So we'll kind of go through what exactly happened at Davos and all that here in a second. So first of all, the reasons why we need to take Greenland. First of all, the reason given is security, but this is total bullshit. I'm sorry. we back during the Cold War days, we had 40 bases. Most of them were radar missile detection bases. Now we only have one up there in Thule, I think. You can see it in the top left of that map. But the Danish government has said we are free to occupy as many of our old military bases as we want, and they'll even subsidize us if we do. So the whole we need them to have military bases and stuff is total BS. We already have military bases there. Next up is minerals. Everybody says, Greenland has gold, it has silver, it has copper, it has rare earths, it has everything. The thing is though, first of all, nobody's actually done any prospecting. So nobody's actually 100% sure what Greenland has. Additionally, a large portion of the minerals it does have is buried under literally hundreds or dozens of feet of ice. And also, there's not a single port in all of Greenland that is capable of exporting massive quantities of minerals in large amounts. So, it is estimated that it would cost $1 trillion with a T, dollars to set up a profitable mineral extraction and refining industry in Greenland. And it would also take, probably 15 to 20 years to actually build all of it and set all of that up. The reality is that we have much better places to extract minerals from, at least in the near future. 100 years from now, okay, maybe, but as of right now, any mineral extraction enterprise in Greenland would be horrendously unprofitable. Lastly, is sort of the imperialism justification. We need to take over Greenland before Russia and China do it. Basically, this boils down to we need to do an imperialism before these other countries do an imperialism. Yeah, it sounds stupid when you phrase it like that, because it is stupid. there's no chance that Russia or China is going to just show up on Greenland and seize it. First of all, China has absolutely no access to the Arctic whatsoever, and Russia's navy, first of all, since the start of the Ukraine war, has shrunk by like half. And second of all, it's a joke compared to even a moderately sized country like Australia could easily trounce Russia in the naval department. So yeah. All right. And what would be the consequences if we actually did annex Greenland, if we did actually invade it? First of all, it would almost undoubtedly destroy NATO. All these European countries deployed troops to Greenland when they heard that Trump really wanted it. And these weren't serious military forces. You know, some of them only sent 1 or 2 soldiers. But the point is, if the U.S. does attack, they have to kill soldiers from all these different NATO countries, which would basically destroy the alliance, right? Or it would force every other country in NATO to declare war on the United States. And that would be the end of NATO. And there's nothing Russia or China want more than that. I guarantee it. The other thing is the tariffs. He threatened a bunch of European countries with tariffs if they didn't support his plans to annex Greenland. And then, like he always does, he backed out. But, you know, he changes his mind more often than a teenage girl. So by the time, hell, even this video comes out, or next week or next month, he could just decide once again to impose those tariffs. So the threat of tariffs is always there. And, of course, the Europeans can retaliate against any tariffs with tariffs of their own, and by selling American government bonds, which would crash the value of the dollar and also make servicing America's debt increasingly more difficult. So don't think that they have no leverage in this whole, you know, trade negotiation, economic warfare, because the European countries absolutely do. In fact, we've already seen Sweden, and I think Norway too, and Denmark, sell off billions of dollars worth of U.S. government bonds. And when that happened, the value of the US dollar crashed by 1% in a day, which is a big deal. It basically means we experienced 1% inflation on all imports in 24 hours. That's really, really bad. So Davos happened. He made speeches. He said we want Greenland, yada, yada, yada. He said a lot of stuff. He's a yapper. Trump's a yapper. But at the end of the day, he backed off on the tariffs and said we have a framework of a deal for, you know, the acquisition of Greenland. First of all, this deal, he said, is being negotiated directly with the Secretary of NATO. NATO is not a country. They cannot negotiate on behalf of its constituent members. That makes no sense. Also, I'm 85% sure this is just a face-saving maneuver. Anytime Trump says we have a deal to do X, it is almost certain that that is total bullshit, that that is a lie. He does this all the time. There are numerous examples of him doing it in the past. Now, all this being said, if I had a magic wand and I could wave this wand and poof, tomorrow Greenland would be under the control of the United States and there'd be, you know, no fallout from it, then yes, I would want to do it. I think, you know, Greenland's like the new Alaska, basically. It's just a big chunk of ice that, even though it's completely useless right now, in 100 years when global warming makes, you know, a bunch of the ice melt and we run out of other sources of valuable minerals, okay, owning Greenland makes sense. But given all the consequences that would come from a military action, unless we can purchase it, which the Danish government has already said is off the table, there's no situation I can see where it's worth fighting over. Next up, we have our friendly neighbors to the north, Canada. They call, by the way, the day of American annexation the day of the rake, because we're like raking in the maple leaves. Get it? Haha. Couple things with Canada. First of all, pretty low percentage, 15%. I don't think it's like super likely we actually invade Canada, but I think it's definitely still possible. Out of all the provinces in Canada, only Alberta and maybe Saskatchewan are culturally similar enough to the United States to support annexation. I think pretty much all the other provinces would be absolutely against becoming part of America, and we'd probably have to fight some sort of guerrilla warfare, urban combat hellscape to actually get them to integrate into the U.S. It would be madness. It'd be terrible. One of the big ironies of our current relationship with Canada is that Mark Carney would probably not be in power if Trump hadn't won the election. Okay, so let me explain. Before the Canadian elections happened, before the American elections happened, this guy named Pierre Poilievre, yes, was leading in all the polls in Canada, okay? And this guy, Mark Carney, was part of Justin Trudeau's party, and Justin Trudeau was very unpopular, and so Mark Carney was unpopular. And Pierre billed himself as, the Canadian right-wing version of Trump. He was like a populist, and he was going to make Canada great again, whatever. But then Trump actually got into office, and everybody kind of realized that, maybe it's not a good idea to elect a huge dumbass to be in charge of our country just because he riles people up. And so, in a historic turnaround, Mark Carney won the election. It also didn't help that one of Trump's first actions was slapping tariffs on Canada, which really pissed them off and made anyone claiming to be on good terms with America seem much less viable, much less popular in Canadian politics. If you have not seen the speech that Mark Carney gave during the World Economic Forum, I highly recommend you check it out because it is very important and very revealing. And he expressed a lot of the things that I have been saying in this video, namely that the liberal world order is dead, and America is basically like a rogue state now, and we can't rely on them for all of our security and economic needs. I'll talk more about this at the end of the video, but the American world order is dead. Finally, during the World Economic Forum, it was announced that Canada has basically snubbed America and signed a trade deal with China instead. And I think I saw today, I read a headline that Trump has completely chimping out over this and is threatening like 100% tariffs on Canada if they don't renege on their deal. Great. The deal is, mostly symbolic. The biggest thing I think is the electric cars. They're removing tariffs on Chinese electric cars. This is obviously, though, a big deal because it signals that, Canada is not satisfied with being America's hat, with being in America's sphere of influence, and they are actively pursuing their own foreign policy. Also, I just realized this map I'm using says Vancouver is here. That is absolutely not true. Somebody needs to fix this. That's bothering me. It's probably made with AI, like everything these days. Okay, that's Canada. Now let's talk about our neighbor down south, Mexico. So, the main justification for a military invasion or action against Mexico is, of course, drugs and the drug cartels. Where have I heard that before? Hint, hint, Venezuela. The difference is you could legitimately make the case that, the vast majority of drugs that do enter the United States actually do at least pass through Mexico. Maybe they aren't manufactured there, maybe they aren't grown there, but they at least pass through Mexico. And Trump has threatened to, bomb or attack the drug cartels before, but of course doing so would be a complete violation of Mexican sovereignty. You can't just willy-nilly go around and declare police actions in other foreign countries. That's kind of what started World War I, fun fact. And then there's the matter of Claudia Sheinbaum, who is the president of Mexico. Trump has a very interesting relationship with Claudia. Sometimes he praises her. Sometimes he's extremely antagonistic towards her. It kind of just depends on what he's saying and the mood he's in. I can't really peg. You can't really classify their relationship as friendly or antagonistic. It kind of flip-flops a lot. But, if we catch him on a bad day and he reads a headline that, 5,000 Americans died from a fentanyl overdose, I could absolutely just see him saying, screw it, and, sending in the Marines to start slaughtering cartel members in Tijuana or something. Just like Canada, though, I have this at a pretty low percentage, 15%, because both Mexico and Canada, if we did any actions against them, would cause an enormous amount of diplomatic backlash. And if we, actually completely destabilize Mexico or Canada because they border us, we would have to deal with, the refugees, and it would be a nightmare. Okay, it would be a nightmare. And I don't think that the government of the United States wants to risk this becoming a, decades-long headache that we now have to deal with and we have to support and pour money and manpower and resources into. All right, and then I have all of these islands. So there are a bunch of islands in the Caribbean that are still owned by some European countries that are kind of holdovers or leftovers from the colonial period. The U.S. has actually purchased some of these islands before. The U.S. Virgin Islands, which we bought from Denmark. By the way, that's where Little St. James is, so in a roundabout way, you can kind of blame Denmark for Jeffrey Epstein, just saying. The problem here is that even though there is a lot of islands, and even though, if we are serious about the Monroe Doctrine, we should take them or purchase them from the European powers, would the European powers really be willing to sell? That's kind of the question. Or would it be easier to just, make them independent or do some other kind of scheme, maybe make a federation out of all these different islands or something. And if, they were unwilling to sell, would we invade them in order to take them, in order to really enforce the Monroe Doctrine? Basically, I think this would only happen if we've already taken Greenland and we've already destroyed NATO. But if that precondition is met, I see no reason why we wouldn't just straight up, naval invade all these islands and just swipe them. It's free real estate, basically. All right, and finally we have Brazil. So Brazil is a very interesting case. First of all, during Trump's first administration, Brazil was actually an ally of the United States because there was a right-wing populist in charge named Bolsonaro, and Trump and Bolsonaro got on very well. But Bolsonaro lost the most recent election to a guy named Lula, and he basically tried to do what Trump did on January 6th and overthrow the government, but just like Trump, he failed miserably, and they actually threw him in prison. Wow, imagine that. A country actually punishing someone for trying to coup the government? Couldn't be me. Anyway, Trump takes exception to the fact that his friend Bolsonaro rots in a jail while this left-wing guy is in charge of Brazil, and he has made, Truth Social posts about it, expressing his outrage in the past. If we're serious about this whole Monroe Doctrine thing, the only country that can even come close to rivaling us in the Western Hemisphere is Brazil. They have the most territory besides us, and they have the most population, I think, besides us. Their geography is much, much worse. They have a real problem with their internal infrastructure, where all their cities are on narrow coastal plains, and the interior is, filled with the Amazon rainforest and mountains and other jungles, and it's just a mess. So the geography sucks, but they have potential. They have plenty of natural resources, plenty of arable land, and enough talent and manpower to do great things, given the opportunity. So, while I think it's pretty unlikely, I only put it at a 2% chance, if Brazil, starts really, wheeling and dealing with China, or starts building up its navy, starts asserting itself independently on the world stage, I could see a situation where we do some sort of targeted strike to kind of put them in their place. I don't think it's very likely, but it could happen. All right, so to wrap it up, I think that this most recent military action against Venezuela will lead to the birth of a new world order. First of all, I think this has brought about the death of the American empire. So since World War II, and especially since the fall of the Soviet Union, the world has operated on a unipolar system. America was the only superpower, and every country's foreign relations was defined by their relationship to America. But ever since Trump took office, we've experienced a new kick of isolationism, and we're kind of cutting ourselves off from the world, or at least the world outside of the Western Hemisphere. And this is leaving many of our traditional allies high and dry. So I think it's very likely that our influence over, for example, the EU and countries such as Australia or Japan or South Korea will slip by the time Trump leaves office. And I don't think any future administration will be able to meaningfully reverse this trend. I also think, and we've already started to see, a massive de-dollarization effort around the world. I already mentioned Sweden and Denmark, and I have a feeling, especially in the coming years, that this will be an increasing trend. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that gold, the value of gold and silver, have been experiencing an insane spike the past couple months, is because everybody's trying to move away from the dollar. The biggest reason this hasn't happened in earnest yet is because there's not really a viable alternative. I mean, you could say like Bitcoin is maybe, but that's really more of a speculative investment. The euro maybe, but Europe doesn't have the growing population required to really sustain like long-term economic growth. China manipulates their currency too much. There's really just not a good option right now, which is why, again, people are dumping all their money into gold. But I think as soon as some sort of, Diamond Trust or Mars Buck or something in the future everyone immediately is going to jump ship off the dollar, and it will bring about economic ruin to the United States. The other increasing trend that we're seeing is the rise of multipolarity. So unipolar right means one pole. Multipolarity is now there are multiple focal points of geopolitics. China being the most obvious other pole, but there are other powers to consider too, such as the EU. India is definitely on the table. Even something like Brazil, or even some sort of future power out of Africa, maybe the East African Federation, maybe Nigeria. Something like that could definitely happen. Throw in Turkey or Saudi Arabia there too. So we're living in a new era in history where the time has come for countries to establish themselves, to make big moves, and it is a time of great change that has been ushered in. We're also reverting away from the liberal world order and towards the law of the jungle, where might makes right. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that this is just a shift in the world order to what they call the natural world order, but this is a misnomer. We are not shifting to a natural world order. We are shifting to a world chaos. Basically, we'll soon live in a world where any country can attack its neighbor for any reason and annex its territory and put its people to the sword just because they have the power to do so. And that is a very scary world. The people, it is reminiscent of the medieval period, of certain other times in human history, and spoiler alert, those were not the good times. People lived in constant fear of being raided, their villages being sacked, all their wealth being hauled off, their crops being despoiled, their livestock being slaughtered, etc., etc. Basically, everyone had to fear for their lives 24/7, and all power, political or otherwise, ultimately had to bow down to the end of a sword or the barrel of a gun. These were not happy times. It is not a good thing that we are transitioning back to this, but in some ways it was always inevitable. Empires rise and fall, and the American Empire is no exception. It was inevitable that one day our influence across the globe would slip. I just didn't expect it to be this freaking stupid and for us to have this many self-inflicted wounds. It is quite unfortunate, but this is the path that we are on. Okay, I know that ending bit was pretty depressing, but I hope everybody enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for my upcoming videos, which I'm super excited about. I will catch y'all on the flip side.